In the world of 1/72nd early modern Asian wars, it is important for the aspiring Japanese collector to amass a vast army of Ashigaru, because Ashigaru are the bread and butter of Sengoku period Japanese armies. Now, what options are there for the general who wants Ashigaru in 1/72nd scale? Do you know? I mean, what we're gonna do is explore it, and so you will eventually know after watching this video. This is Ieyasu Castle Hamamatsu, by the way. The Ashigaru, the backbone of the Japanese feudal armies, both in history and on the tabletop. These troops were defined as soldiers who were not of the warrior class and could comprise anything from conscripted farmers, full-time professional retainers, or hired mercenaries from other domains. But how do miniature hobbyists represent these soldiers as figures? The market of Ashigaru miniatures is fascinating to me because almost all of them don't accurately reflect the appearance of troops for most of the Sengoku Jidai. There is a general awareness now that the pop culture view of the ninja with its all-black outfit is a fictional representation, but that shift in perception has not been applied for the Ashigaru. The common view of the uniform Ashigaru is derived from sources like the Zoyo Monogatari and apply for the Keichō and later period, 1596 onward. Therefore, these troops reflect a transitional period between the end of the Sengoku period and the beginning of the Edo period. The idea of uniform Ashigaru for the vast majority of the Sengoku Jidai is inaccurate. From the historical record, we know that Ashigaru did not have uniform clothing until the Edo period. From period paintings, we can see that armor was irregular during the 1570s and before. Some soldiers may have been wealthy enough to own parts of armor sets to varying degrees of completion, while others wouldn't. At times, daimyo issued armor to their soldiers, but their collections could be ununiform and unable to equip every soldier. Therefore, Ashigaru would have been in a mix of armors or be completely unarmored, and even after the 1570s, there are depictions of barely armored warriors. During the closing years of the Sengoku Jidai, we eventually see more widespread uniform armor manufacturing, so for conflicts such as the Imjin War, which occurred in 1592, and Sekigahara, which occurred in 1600, the popular conception of Ashigaru is just barely possible. While we don't know the exact date of the creation of the Okegawa-do, it is most likely in the 1590s and as a new form of high-end plate armor, which would have only been worn by the wealthiest warriors. So seeing this form of armor being used by the poorest infantry en masse in armies is truly something. For a clan to be able to outfit so many of its soldiers in this new armor would be incredible, and really only plausible in the Edo period, possibly around the 1610s. However, wargamers and collectors are free to depict their armies however they wish, and the importance of historical accuracy is completely subjective according to personal tastes. Given that the Ashigaru are a historical unit and are often used in the genre of historical wargaming, historical accuracy usually has some importance. However, some wargaming armies are inspired by popular media or non-historical ideas, and may not be concerned with history at all. That is as valid an approach for making an army for one's enjoyment as any other. In this video, I want to critically examine a few sets of Ashigaru miniatures. The scope of this video is to cover existing options in 1/72nd scale. I count 3D prints as possible miniatures because a strength of the medium is being able to rescale miniatures. However, there are so many sets of Ashigaru that I don't have the scope to cover every release without making this work too long. So I will cover what I believe to be the most popular sets available. Also, I'm conscious that with the popularity of the setting, there will no doubt be great releases in the future, and the nature of the video format means that this can't be a living document. So as time passes, it will increasingly become less useful and just a historical record, exactly like the Ashigaru themselves. The point of this video is to evaluate the existing Ashigaru options. I'm going to avoid discussing price because introducing a quantitative qualifier naturally provides an objective point of comparison in a single category. But by contrast, every other notable point of comparison between kits such as sculpt quality, modularity,
options, and pose quality will seem lacking without similar quantitative rankings. But if I was to provide that, then the subjectivity of these criteria being evaluated within a numerical ranking system will give my opinions a false objectivity by the hard logical connotations of numbers. So, no numbers. I'm just going to talk about my opinions. Before we begin, here's a thought exercise for you. Can you tell which company makes which Ashigaru miniatures? All of these miniatures have been painted in the same style to create some degree of parity. Some of these have been modified with green stuff matchlock cords. This does affect the purity of judging the models purely by their own merit, but the intention of this exercise is to see how companies make the bodies of the Ashigaru figures distinctive enough from other companies. The companies which manufactured or designed the pictured models are, in no particular order, Zvezda, Smol Miniatures, Kyoushuneko Miniatures, Redbox, Saga Miniatures, Hokusa 3D Designs, and Wargames Atlantic. Okay, now let's see some close-ups of the models so you can assess them properly. Okay, now let's do the final arrangement. Here we go. Which company made which models? And here we have the final arrangement. Wargames Atlantic, Kyoushuneko Miniatures, Zvezda, Smol Miniatures, Hokusa 3D Designs, Redbox, and Saga Miniatures. There are subtle differences in the depiction of the length and shape of the kusazuri, the shape of plates on the tote, the angle of the cloth draping from the jingasa, the placement and shape of their swords and scabbards, and the general build of the men depicted. But the core depiction of the pop cultural late Sengoku, early Edo Ashigaru is represented in these figures, in my opinion. Miniature collectors can feel free to mix and match, like I have done, or buy their figures from a single source, but we have many options to create our armies. Player choice and market competition benefits the consumer and allows for more varied forces to be made, increasing the creative possibilities of hobbyists. With this brief visual comparison over, let us examine the product offering of different companies in more detail. Keichō, period appropriate Ashigaru. The first miniatures available for 1/72nd scale modelers were in plastic kits, and Zvezda provided many such kits. They created a general army box with the Samurai Army infantry kit, focusing on samurai, but providing a single sculpt each of a pike-armed, a matchlock-armed, and a bow-armed Ashigaru. With this first release in 2003, wargamers had easy access to great sculpts that they could pick up from a store, long before the advent of 3D printing. These sculpts are finely detailed and accurate, and provide you with every main troop type. Sashimono are detached and optional. This box set holds up to this day, and I would consider it my foundation for building a Sengoku army in this scale, for the number and variety of figures it holds. In terms of Ashigaru, this box set provides a single pose and sculpt of a command Ashigaru bearing a banner, 6 models total of a pike-armed kneeling Ashigaru pose, 6 models total of a kneeling teppo-armed matchlock Ashigaru gunner, and finally 6 models total of a kneeling monopose Ashigaru archer. The drawback for this set in regards to Ashigaru is it only has one sculpt of each weapon type. In 1/72nd scale, it was common for duplicate one-piece sculpts to be given in a box, and some collectors even try to have all their units use the same sculpt. In this case, all the sculpts are great for their use case, as each of their depicted positions are very useful for wargamers, with pikemen crouching defensively, teppo gunners firing, and archers drawing their bows. Their tanegashima, guns they wield, have matchlock cords feeding directly into their muskets, which is a nice detail. However, if you would like your armies varied, with as much unique poses as possible, the single sculpts are a huge drawback. The pikeman Ashigaru appears to be wearing tatami do, while the archer and the teppo gunner appear to be wearing okegawa do. Interestingly, the pikemen have sode, which is very historically plausible since uniforms did not exist in this period, and sode are of the period. It would just mean that the infantry are unusually well equipped. The arquebus gunner is about as stereotypical as you can get. The archer has a bare head, which is a suboptimal choice when you only have one sculpt. If a collector was to use this sculpt unmodified as the basis for their archers, then their archer units will be mostly helmetless and will stand out against the other units. Again, this period has no uniforms, so it is plausible, but it would be strange that only archers did not wear helmets. Some conversion work may therefore be necessary. Zvezda clearly realized the error of their ways because they released helmeted bowman Ashigaru in 2012, as well as some with Yari and Teppo guns. This was for their Art of Tactic game system, and also came with various samurai releases. Each of these Art of Tactics sets contain 5 figures and range from 3 to 5 poses, and each set is intended to represent a single unit. The sculpting quality, posing, and detail on all of these sets are great, and their armor is historically appropriate. The bowmen are all represented as drawing their bows at different angles. The gunners are firing, readying, or are at rest. It's worth noting that these matchlock gunners have match cords on their belts, but cords are not threaded to their arquebuses for firing. The spearmen have 2 defensive poses, one resting pose and one advancing pose. It's worth noting that their Yari spears are shorter than the pikes in the Samurai Army infantry set. I think that these are great sets to have a few extra figures to supplement your forces, but I would not build my force based on them because each box has so few figures, so you'll have to buy many boxes to complete an army. But they are nice for variety. Following up on the success of Zvezda's release, Redbox released a spearman set and a combined archers and arquebus set in 2006. It made sense given that there was no dedicated Ashigaru sets in this scale in existence, so they were fulfilling a market demand in the wake of Zvezda's samurai set. And interestingly, Redbox never released a samurai set despite making warrior monks, iko-iki, artillery, peasant infantry, and ninja. Coincidentally, all items which Zvezda did not make, although Zvezda did eventually make ninjas in the Zvezda Samurai Army Headquarters set years later. These Redbox models are not great. They are historically accurate, but the details are very blocky and vague. All of the soldiers in both sets appear to be wearing okegawa do, although it is a little hard to tell because of the blocky detail. While the faces pass as human, and you can make out lines on the armor, the hands do not have pronounced fingers, the weapons lack detail, and the overall sculpts lack definition. The nature of monoposes means that the models are quite flat and a little unnatural, and parts can be merged together, such as arms joined to breastplates. Some of the spearmen have integrated sashimono, while none of the ranged options have sashimono options at all. The matchlock models don't have match cords on their arms, just so you're aware. At least both of these sets give 12 or 13 monoposes and 48 to 52 figures respectively. So there's a lot of choice in how you make your units. Interestingly, all the archers do not have helmets, just like the archer sculpt in the Zvezda Samurai Army infantry set, which only reinforces my theory that these red box sets are designed to supplement the Zvezda set. These sets are good for getting a lot of figures on the table that are reasonably varied. They are not good for detail or massed sashimono. It is important to note that when these sets were released, there were no other options. 3D printing did not exist. If you needed varied Ashigaru in 1/72nd scale, this was the only kit to purchase. However, now that options do exist, I just wouldn't buy this set. I don't like the blocky details. Now, I did buy this set, but that was before 3D printing really took off. And in this current day and age, you can have so many more varied and better sculpts from 3D printing. As 3D printing has become more popular, the options available to collectors have greatly expanded. So let's look at various STLs that work for this scale. Kyoushuneko Miniatures published some of the earliest Ashigaru available in STL form in 2021, available with spear, matchlock, or bow options, and more unusually, command figures and Ozutsu. Now, while the Jingasa and Do are quite well made, they are all emblazoned with a Tomoe symbol. This is very handy if you are collecting a clan in the Edo period, which uses a Tomoe in the Mon, such as the famous Utsunomiya clan. Okay, so not that useful. The Ryukyu kingdom used it as a symbol, but we have very little historical evidence of their armor. The practice of painting Mon upon Jingasa and armor for Ashigaru is a hallmark of the Edo period. So these models can work for the early Edo period for a clan which features the Tomoe. The sculpt quality is great on these models, with nice sandals and shin armor, and well-rendered faces. These models do have historical accuracy issues within the context of pop culture Ashigaru that in themselves, as a concept, inherently have historical accuracy issues. Their archers and gunners do not have tekko on their kote, which is theoretically possible. You could just not attach it, but every example of kote I've found has tekko, so it seems very odd to leave it out. The shin armors should be around half the length of the other splints on the inside of the leg, but they are not. Their breastplates are of the modern okegawa and hotoke-do, but these should only have string on one side to tie it together, while the other side should be hinged. Are these major issues? I think these are relatively minor details, which the average hobbyist would barely notice. But ultimately, importance is subjective and up to the individual to decide. There are 6 poses for each weapon type in each set, which is okay. There's enough to make units look varied. The spear poses are quite defensive and similar. The gunners are either aiming or readying their matchlocks, while the archers have the most pose variety, with aiming, drawing their bows, loosing, and knocking. The arquebus gunners don't have match cords for their guns, if you care about that kind of thing. Being readily available from late 2021, they were a good option for filling out armies if you followed a Tomoe-based clan, or you just disregarded Clan Mon entirely. These models could be converted to be suitable for general use with some cutting, but this obviously adds work and inconvenience. When I was making my pike-armed Ashigaru, I was modifying these models because they were accessible and great sculpts, except for the sculpted Mon on the armor. However, if I was making my units now, I would not be utilizing these sculpts much because the inconvenience of converting them is disincentivized by the great options that are now available on the market. Smol Miniatures released a Kickstarter campaign in 2022, which offered spear, bow, and matchlock Ashigaru, but also standard bearers, sword wielders, and soldiers carrying what appear to be bamboo sticks. These are probably supply soldiers. Now, these aren't great sculpts. There's a rim on all of the armor plates for some reason, including on the chest, where gaps in plates are actually inversed and represented by rims. The shoulder armor on their kote is just one plate with rims, which is not great. The legs at least have decent sandals and shin splints, but there's another weird rim near the knee, which seems to imply a touch knee pad. But if that was the case, why is it so small and entirely concealed by tying cords? The heads are fine, but honestly, if you get human heads wrong on a sculpt, you should get your own head checked out. The Tanegashima models do have matchlock cords feeding into their guns. These are some of the worst Ashigaru models on the market, in my opinion, which is why I have a few sculpts in my army. At least there's a decent pose variety with 20 different Teppo sculpts, 20 archer sculpts, 24 different monopose spearmen, and 16 swordsman figures. But these sculpts are very standard and quite similar to each other, with some sculpts simply being duplicates of other sculpts, but with a Sashimono added. They also offer an alternative modular spear Ashigaru set with 24 poses total and an impressive 11 polearm options. While paint jobs can conceal or change sculpting details and make models better for your army that way, that is a coping mechanism, and these are still subpar sculpts compared to many other companies in the market. Saga Miniatures released a variety of Samurai and Ashigaru miniatures in 2023 as part of their Samurai Rising campaign. They provide 2 core weapon types of Ashigaru necessary for most wargaming armies, with arquebus and spears, but don't provide bows. Bows were used in the period, so that is a pity, but for some reason they provide Naginata units, sword options, and a small command squad instead. There are 5 poses each for each weapon type, which is a decent amount of variety for very similar stoic poses. The detail is nice on the figures, with good sculpting generally. There are cords to tie their okegawa do depicted on the right side of these figures, which is correct, but this is mirrored on the left side, which is where the hinge is, which is unusual. You won't see the finer details when a figure is scaled down to wargaming size, but it's nice they tried to depict such detail. The Sunyate, or shin armor, on the models appear to be of the Tsubo Sunyate variety, which is made of 3 plates, but none of the figures have Tateage knee pads. I guess that's fine, but it is a little unusual. The splint type Shino Sunyate was more common and less restrictive for movement. These models just have unusually armored shins. The posing on these models are quite static, which is fine for most of the firing Ashigaru and single loading Ashigaru, but limiting for the spear, Naginata, and sword wielders. Everyone is braced or at rest. No one is aggressively attacking or running forward. The Teppo Ashigaru do not have firing match cords on their persons. They also have weird kote for some reason, with splints that seem to be ridged but in one piece, and shoulder pieces that have this strange plate. But why? Their other Ashigaru have arms which are fine. The swordsman Ashigaru also have a lot of chainmail on their kote sleeves. Chainmail wraps around the whole arm. Now historically, some kote did have full chainmail instead of the more typical gusari pattern with square holes. So it's historically plausible, but it is atypical. It would restrict your movement. Why do these guys have such armored arms? Who knows? There is a single model with the Sashimono, presumably the commander. Saga Miniatures also more recently released 3 more Spear Ashigaru in 2025 with the standard Shino Sunyate and broad-plated Shino Kote for the forearms, and these are more standard and generally useful. I very much appreciate the detail on these models, which you probably won't notice in a tabletop setting, but I applaud the effort. But there are some strange, if detailed, armor choices, and the poses aren't very dynamic. However, having unusual armor options allows you to add variety to your units, and if you mix different models from different companies, it lets you supplement your figures with options which are rarely depicted. Hokusa 3D released their version of Ashigaru in 2024, with spear options, bow options, matchlock options, command options, and even ammunition resupply options. The details are very nice. They are excellent examples of the baseline Ashigaru, wearing the stereotypical okegawa do, but also the hotoke do. Their armor is accurate and well rendered, and I noticed their kote have an elbow plate, which is rarely depicted, as well as string on the opposite side of the hinge on their do chest armor. The faces are expressive. The proportions are accurate. These are great models. The gunners have great variety in their firing, reloading, and readying, with 12 poses total, standing and kneeling. The archers have 12 poses of firing and reloading, both standing and kneeling. The Yari Ashigaru have 12 defending poses, 12 attacking poses, 6 kneeling poses, and 12 standing poses. Incredible. It's worth noting that the charging, defending, teppo, and bow Ashigaru have 6 modular poses each, so arms can be swapped between bodies for even greater diversity, and all the heads are separate for maximum customization. The Yari are separate from the hands with different lengths, and the Sashimono are optional extras. The teppo gunners have matchlock cords feeding into their guns. All of the sets come with modular head options of Ashigaru heads with Jingasa, but the company also sells alternative bare head options, which were included in the Kickstarter, such as the Hachi Kane head options and headband options. The charging and defending Yari sets come with 3 additional command figures, and the matchlock and bow units come with an additional command figure. These are splendid models, and you can tell the creator did their research for historical accuracy. Wargames Atlantic are a fairly well-known company in the miniature scene and have a digital branch called Atlantic Digital, where they have released some Ashigaru in 2025. So far, they have options for teppo gunners and Yari wielders. The Aquabus wielders have 4 body poses, 2 standing, 2 kneeling, and 4 arm options, allowing for many combinations. The teppo guns they wield do not have matchlock cords. Optional Sashimono are separate, and their swords are also separate, so if you want swordless Ashigaru, you have that option. But it does mean that the sword does not look like it is worn beneath the belt if attached. The details are good, and the armor is mostly accurate. But there was the choice to put small raised ridges to delineate the borders between plates on the Okegawa do, which isn't terrible. At tabletop scale, you won't notice, and really, the raised ridges may make the edges between plates contrast more as a stylistic effect, but that is not how the do is usually built. There are bare head options, which are a nice addition. Their Yari Ashigaru set has 5 bodies and 5 arm options, with the same head options as the other set. Detachable Sashimono and separate spears with different lengths. The swords are also separate. Most of the poses are static, but there is also a kneeling and running pose. The details are the same as the same base model is reused. Wargames Atlantic make nice sets with good detail, and if you want modularity, they're quite good for that. Now, there are numerous other STLs out there, but they're either less well known or have Clan Mon emblazoned on the armor, which limits their use. While this video has tried to cover some popular miniature ranges, I also acknowledge that the full list of possible Ashigaru miniatures is very vast. Gamak has a bunch with emblazoned Takeda Mons. Sharedog Miniatures has a few with some kind of weird raised mon. It resembles mirror armor used on Chinese armors. The Printing Ever Goes On has a flower mon emblazoned Ashigaru, and these specific miniatures might help if you're trying to collect a particular clan during the early Edo period. And there are many other manufacturers out there, in addition to those I've just mentioned. Now that we have covered the pop culture conception of Ashigaru, I want to bring some attention to the Ashigaru usable for all of the Sengoku period, rather than just a fraction of its end. These models would be better representatives for what the typical army would look like during the time of warring states. Muromachi period appropriate Ashigaru. Redbox made a set of Iko-Iki and Japanese peasant infantry in plastic in 2007, marking the first plastic set that could reasonably represent Muromachi period Ashigaru. Both sets feature 48 figures in 12 poses. The armor and weapons depicted in both sets are reasonably accurate. The Iki evidence various kabuto, some jingasa or straw hats, bare heads, and a monk cow, while the peasants just wear peasant clothes. Unfortunately, the details in these sets are not great. The detail can be blocky rather than sharp, and there's often a lot of flash. For the peasant infantry, I don't think sharp details are necessary because clothing can look vague and flexible in form, but the armor on the Iki does suffer from not depicting the cords on Shikoro or the Kusazuri well. The detailing is passable on the faces and the general human anatomy, and the weapons are vaguely fine. The blades and components on weapons are blocky and ill-defined, but they resemble weapons in the loosest sense. One figure appears to wield a hammer, which is very odd. It doesn't suit the dimensions of the Ochuchi hammer. The peasant warriors are armed with proper weapons, which is different from most sets, which like to depict these kinds of figures with improvised weapons. And so Redbox have taken the historically accurate approach. Both sets evidence a range of close quarter and ranged weapons. You get one bow sculpt per set, and the rest of the ranged weapons are matchlocks, which is increasingly accurate the later you go into the Sengoku period. The matchlocks do not have match cords on the models, if you are interested in that. Some of the Ikki models evidence a range of armors that could be Okegawa Do, Tatami Do, and what could possibly be Haramaki Do. The Okegawa Do wouldn't work well for most of the Sengoku period, as it only became popularized during the end, but the other figures are fine. While most of the figures work for the Muromachi period, they're just so blocky. The detail is just not there. But these miniatures are adequate for filling out an army, considering you get so many figures per set. Kyoushuneko Miniatures made a single set of Japanese feudal peasants in 2022. The set has 5 poses, which show them with improvised weapons, which is stereotypical for depictions of Sengoku period peasants and Ikki warriors. But that is more appropriate for the Edo period, after Hideyoshi's sword hunts. Sengoku period peasants would have been able to easily procure proper weapons. While it's not impossible for villagers to be fighting with tools in the period, it would be a rare occurrence, and if they had any intention of fighting beforehand, they would have just armed themselves properly. The sculpting quality is nice. These models are made more individual by irregular stitched patches that are different for every model. While the weapons don't work to make Ashigaru, the bodies are fine. There is only one repeat of a head sculpt, with the other heads being unique, and each body is distinct by its combination of stitched patches, straw raincoats, and leg bindings. While the bodies are nice, the weapons are not historically appropriate for the Sengoku period, so conversions will be needed if you value historical accuracy. Oak Entertainment made a series of unarmored Ashigaru figures in 2023. They have sets of tatami armor figures, which in their uniformity and jingasa are more appropriate for the close of the Sengoku Jidai, but their standard 4 Ashigaru sets are perfect for the whole period. The sets are divided by poses using a similar base body and all wield naginatas. The creator has swapped around component parts of models, such as legs, shirts, straw raincoats, arms, belts, or rice rations. Sets 1 to 3 are all of the same pose of arms and legs, although their clothing is switched around for a total of 10 similar poses per set, which is nice if you're one of those modelers who want all of their models to be in the same pose. However, it's not ideal if you're trying to realistically portray these soldiers. There is one set of leggings which is studded and resembles Chinese, Korean, or Mongol-style brigandine. I think that's a little strange, but everything else is fine. The 4th set has 10 mixed poses, which are the most realistic for depicting troops, and fittingly, also doesn't feature the studded leggings at all, to reinforce its general sense of realism. It's worth noting that these models are partially modular, with separate heads and weapons, so there is some freedom of customization, which adds to their appeal. If you wish to equip these troops with the more popular spears, it's an easy fix of just sourcing spears from elsewhere and placing them in the hands of these sculpts. The head sculpts are quite varied, allowing you to put together a distinct unit if you wish. The creator also put effort in to make many naginata types, which is unusual and a great positive if you want more varied naginatas. The detail rendered on the faces and clothing is nice, and the weapons are period appropriate, so these models are great representations of Ashigaru. However, there is no armor whatsoever, so they're not a complete representation of troops from the period, but they work well for many unarmored troops that would constitute an army. Saga Miniatures have a range of Sengoku period Japanese models as discussed, and have a set of sellsword Ashigaru in Haramaki armor, which was released in 2025. These soldiers are more stripped down, with bare arms and legs, and this accurately reflects period sources. This set of 3 monoposes provide 3 weapon options, which are of a singular pose each of sword, glaive, and spear. The sculpting quality is fine, the cords on the armor are rendered in their tiny parts, but there is an odd raised rim around the outline of their kusazuri thigh and groin armors. They seem oddly rigid and too short as well. Their sunyate shin armors don't have tateage knee guards, which is fine, but they are also not cut shorter on the inside, which is historically inaccurate. The models are also oddly uniform. They are the same base model reposed with different weapons. So you would need different sculpts to make an accurate army. But these figures would be great for variety. The pose number is very small, with only 3 poses total and 1 pose of each weapon type. However, these miniatures were designed for the Sengoku Warriors Rising game, which is a semi-fantasy interpretation of the period. So these models weren't designed with historical accuracy in mind. Within the context of the broader market, these models are limited in use for making a whole army, but are very usable in adding variety to units. Hokusa 3D made light Ashigaru sets and Iko-Iki villager sets in 2025, which are nice models that have less uniform elements appropriate for the broader period of the warring states, but still have some elements that are more suited to the late Sengoku or early Edo period. In a pure technical sense, these sets should probably be classified as Keichō period Ashigaru and be covered in the prior section, but they visually do not have the uniform aesthetic of all the models in the prior section, and do have many elements that would work for the broader period with conversions. The light Ashigaru are equipped with Hotoke Do, Okegawa Do, Tatami Do, or are unarmored, and armed with spears or matchlocks, or the implements of a command set. While the Iko-Iki villagers are unarmored and armed with matchlocks or makeshift close combat weapons. The light Ashigaru have 6 fighting poses, 6 standing poses, 6 shooting poses, and 4 command poses, while the Iko-Iki villagers have 6 fighting poses, 6 standing poses, and 6 shooting poses. The lighter Ashigaru sets come with smaller jingasa and jingasa without a cloth drape, while the villager sets provide straw hats and bare head options. The modularity of separate heads is a nice touch. The sculpting quality of all the sets is lovely, with anatomically accurate bodies and nice detailing on the armor and clothing. The close combat Ashigaru have some models with scythes for some reason, which is odd. The matchlock models have match cords. While Hokusa 3D's light Ashigaru sets are more varied than their Ashigaru infantry sets, they are still very well armored. Hotoke Do and Okegawa Do are the final form of the evolution of Toze Gusoku. You get an unarmored figure in each set and some tatami do. Some warriors don't wear kote and sunyate. You get some jingasa and straw hats, but on the plus side, most of the soldiers have great breastplates. If we are trying to depict some accurate Ashigaru, it does seem odd that more common older forms of armor, like haramaki, do, aren't depicted here. But if we simply take this set at face value as an alternative Ashigaru set, it literally is that. And the components are plausible, except for the scythes. Considering everything, these are still heavily armored Ashigaru of the Sengoku period, rather than light Ashigaru, given that many warriors were unarmored, and as the missionary Louise Froys said, quote, "In Japan, one only needs to don an armored collar to say that he is armed," end quote, which is matched by Japanese and Chinese sources. These Ashigaru are actually not all suited for the whole Muromachi period because of the presence of the Hotoke Do and Okegawa Do being more appropriate for late Sengoku to early Edo, and even Jingasa only show up in large numbers during the late Sengoku period. But I have still included these sets in this category because the tatami do and unarmored figure can work more broadly, and the arms and legs can be useful for conversions. So while these sets are fine for Keichō period Ashigaru. These figures are not very good to represent Ashigaru more broadly for the Sengoku period. There are problems with accurate historical representation with the Iko-Iki villager sets. A common depiction of Iko-Iki is of bearing makeshift weapons, which we already established as historically inaccurate for the Sengoku period. These figures are completely unarmored, but some of the miniatures wear a straw raincoat. While the bodies work for the whole Sengoku Jidai, the makeshift weapons do not. Hokusa's offerings in this instance were not designed specifically for the whole Sengoku period. The purpose was to provide less uniform Ashigaru sculpts and Iko-Iki sculpts, and while the light Ashigaru set is mostly fine to represent late period Ashigaru, the Iko-Iki conform to the pop culture view of Iki militia having improvised weapons, which is not historically accurate for the period. The sculpting quality is fantastic, but if you care about historical accuracy, depending on the period you are trying to depict, these sets may be problematic. Wargames Atlantic make a set of light armored Ashigaru archers as part of their Atlantic digital range, which was released in 2026. There are 11 body poses, including one kneeling pose, and the figures are armored in a mixture of cuirasses with keibiki odoshi or full lacing, or sugake odoshi, or spaced lacing on the armors for maximum variety. There are a few unarmored poses. There are 11 matched arm poses, with some poses not being joined, so you can mix and match for even more variety. One of the arm poses is of a conch shell and an arm clutching a sword in its scabbard, which is a nice arm option. Head options include bald heads, Jingasa Hapuri masks with eboshi caps, and strangest and most particular of all, an akoda nari with a large brim with no shikoro in the nanban hat style. There are optional sashimono, quivers, and swords in scabbards provided. So the number of options and sheer modularity is nice, allowing the collector to customize their figures to a great extent. The armor, clothing, and human anatomy is all rendered nicely. The poses are of the expected archer variety, so no one is running or advancing, but they're archers, so that's fine. And we get a single kneeling pose, which is nice. The sheer number of options and modularity, coupled with the period accurate armor, makes it a fantastic set for representing troops from the Muromachi period. And finally, Artist Hobby make a set of 6 peasant warriors as part of the Mr. and Mrs. History series that was released in 2026. In this series, they have released various 3D printed Sengoku period miniatures, and this is the first set of peasants they have released thus far. In this set, you receive 6 poses and models total, with 4 poses of warriors holding their spears at the ready, and 2 peasants cowering from unrepresented threats. The clothing depicted is of robes in different lengths, with neckerchiefs and outer jackets for variation. Some don't wear pants, some wear pants, which is accurate. The hairstyles are historically accurate, the faces are anatomically correct, the sandals are fine, there's no historical problems in using these models to represent Ashigaru during the whole of the Sengoku Jidai. The set does not provide many models though, with only 6 figures and 2 aren't in fighting poses at all. This is a pretty small set for what you get. The models are fine, and some collectors may have particular niche uses for cowering peasants, but if you're trying to build a whole army, it would be quite difficult to do with this set. So those are a few sets to represent Ashigaru infantry in the Muromachi period in a wide variety of styles, poses, and model numbers. Feel free to mix and match whatever sets you need to make your ideal army and make an informed decision on how you wish to execute on your project. Ashigaru, both the uniform soldiers of pop culture conception, which historically match the end of the Sengoku Jidai or the beginning of the Edo period, and the mismatched, lightly armored troops best representative of the broader Sengoku period, are essential figures for the period collector. They make up the bulk of armies and form the solid core, atop which a force lays its foundations. With so much choice in products and companies, miniature enthusiasts and hobbyists have flexibility to find the sculpts that work best for their vision of their army set during the Sengoku Jidai. Many thanks to my Patreon supporters, The Command Bunker, Mikhail Belusov, and Cream of the Meme for sponsoring this video.
So, there you have it. That is many choices you have. Not many choices that you have for 172nd Ashigaru. We all need some Ashigaru for our Sengoku era armies, so it was important to cover this. And so with Ieyasu statue in the background, I bid you adieu.